Chapter 29 of 10 Years Later. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Filippo Joachim. 10 Years Later by Alexandre Dumas. Chapter 29. Le Terrain de Dieu. During the progress of these events, Buckingham and the ward travelled in excellent companionship, and made the journey from Paris to Calais in undisturbed harmony together. Buckingham had hurried his departure, so that the greater part of his adieux were very hastily made. His visit to Monsieur and Madame, to the young Queen, and to the Queen Dowager had been paid collectively. A precaution on the part of the Queen Mother, which saved him the distress of any private conversation with Monsieur, and also the danger of seeing Madame again. The carriages containing the luggage had already been sent on beforehand, and in the evening he set off in his travelling carriage with his attendants. The ward, irritated at finding himself dragged away in so abrupt a manner by this Englishman, had sought in his subtle mind for some means of escaping from his fetters, but no one having rendered him any assistance in this respect, he was absolutely obliged, therefore, to submit to the burden of his own evil thoughts and caustic spirit. Such of his friends in whom he had been able to confide had, in their character of wits, rallied him upon the Duke's superiority. Others, less brilliant, but more sensible, had reminded him of the King's orders prohibiting duelling. Others again, and they the larger number, who, in virtue of charity or national vanity, might have rendered him assistance, did not care to run the risk of incurring disgrace, and would, at the best, have informed the ministers of a departure which might end in a massacre on a small scale. The result was, that, after having fully deliberated upon the matter, the ward packed up his luggage, took a couple of horses, and, followed only by one servant, made his way towards the barrier, where Buckingham's carriage was to await him. The Duke received his adversary as he would have done an intimate acquaintance, made room beside him on the same seat with himself, offered him refreshments, and spread over his knees the sable cloak that had been thrown on the front seat. They conversed of the court without alluding to Madame, of Monsieur without speaking of domestic affairs, of the King without speaking of his brother's wife, of the Queen Mother without alluding to her daughter-in-law, of the King of England without alluding to his sister, of the state of the affections of either of the travellers, without pronouncing any name that might be dangerous. In this way the journey, which was performed by short stages, was most agreeable, and Buckingham, almost a Frenchman from wit and education, was delighted at having so admirably selected his travelling companion. Elegant repasts were served, of which they partook but lightly. Trials of horses made in the beautiful meadows that skirted the road. Coursing indulged in, for Buckingham had his greyhounds with him, and in such ways did they pass away the pleasant time. The Duke somewhat resembled the beautiful river Seine, which holds France 1,000 times in its loving embrace, before deciding upon joining its waters with the ocean. In quitting France, it was her recently adopted daughter he had brought to Paris, whom he chiefly regretted. His every thought was a remembrance of her, his every memory a regret. Therefore, whenever, now and then, despite his command over himself, he was lost in thought, the ward left him entirely to his musings. This delicacy might have touched Buckingham, and changed his feelings towards the ward if the latter, while preserving silence, had shown a glance less full of malice and a smile less false. Instinctive dislikes, however, are relentless. Nothing appeases them. A few ashes may sometimes apparently extinguish them, but beneath those ashes the smothered embers rage more furiously. Having exhausted every means of amusement the route offered, they arrived, as we have said, at Calais towards the end of the 6th day. The Duke's attendants, since the previous evening, had travelled in advance, and now chartered a boat for the purpose of joining the yacht, which had been tacking about in sight, or bore broadside on, whenever it felt its white wings wearied, within cannon shot of the jetty. The boat was destined for the transport of the Duke's equipages from the shore to the yacht. The horses had been embarked, having been hoisted from the boat upon the deck in baskets, expressly made for the purpose, and wedded in such a manner that their limbs, even in the most violent fits of terror or impatience, were always protected by the soft support which the sides afforded, and their coats not even turned. 8 of these baskets, placed side by side, filled the ship's hold. It is well known that, in short voyages, horses refuse to eat, but remain trembling all the while, with the best of food before them, such as they would have greatly coveted on land. By degrees the Duke's entire equipage was transported on board the yacht. He was then informed that everything was in readiness, and that they only waited for him, whenever he would be disposed to embark with the French gentleman, for no one could possibly imagine that the French gentleman would have any other accounts to settle with his Grace other than those of friendship. Buckingham desired the captain to be told to hold himself in readiness, but that, as the sea was beautiful and the day promised a splendid sunset, he did not intend to go on board until nightfall, and would avail himself of the evening to enjoy a walk on the strand. He added also that, finding himself in such excellent company, he had not the least desire to hasten his embarkation. As he said this he pointed out to those who surrounded him the magnificent spectacle which the sky presented, of deepest azure in the horizon, the amphitheatre of fleecy clouds ascending from the sun's disk to the zenith, assuming the appearance of a range of snowy mountains, whose summits were heaped one upon another. The dome of clouds was tinged at its base with, as it were, a foam of rubies, fading away into opal and pearly tints, in proportion as the gaze was carried from base to summit. The sea was gilded with the same reflection, and upon the crest of every sparkling wave danced a point of light, like a diamond by lamplight. The mildness of the evening, the sea breezes, so dear to contemplative minds, setting in from the east and blowing in delicious gusts. Then, in the distance, the black outline of the yacht, with its rigging traces upon the empurpled background of the sky, while, dotting the horizon, might be seen, here and there, vessels with their trimmed sails, like the wings of a sea-gull about to plunge. Such a spectacle indeed well merited admiration. A crowd of curious idlers followed the richly dressed attendants, amongst whom they mistook the steward and the secretary for the master and his friend. As for Buckingham, who was dressed very simply, in a grey satin vest and doublet of violet-coloured velvet, wearing his hat thrust over his eyes, and without orders or embroidery, he was taken no more notice of that the ward who was in black, like an attorney. The Duke's attendants had received directions to have a boat in readiness at the jetty head, and to watch the embarkation of their master, without approaching him, until either he or his friend should summon them. Whatever may happen, he had added, laying a stress upon these words, so that they might not be misunderstood. Having walked a few paces upon the strand, Buckingham said to the wards, "I think it is now time to take leave of each other. The tide, you perceive, is rising. 10 minutes hence it will have soaked the sands where we are now walking in such a manner that we shall not be able to keep our footing." "I await your orders, my lord, but—" "But you mean, you are still upon soil which is part of the king's territory?" "Exactly." "Well, do you see yonder a kind of little island surrounded by a circle of water? The pool is increasing every minute, and the isle is gradually disappearing. This island indeed belongs to heaven, for it is situated between two seas, and is not shown on the king's charts. Do you observe it?" "Yes, but we can hardly reach it now without getting our feet wet." "Yes, but observe that it forms an eminence tolerably high, and that the tide rises up on every side, leaving the top free. We shall be admirably placed upon that little theatre. What do you think of it?" "I shall be perfectly happy wherever I may have the honor of crossing my sword with your lordships." "Very well, then. I am distressed to the cause of your wetting your feet, Monsieur de Ward, but it is most essential you should be able to say to the king, 'Sire, I did not fight upon your majesty's territory.' Perhaps the distinction is somewhat subtle, but, since Port-Royal, your nation delights in subtleties of expression. Do not let us complain of this, however, for it makes your wit very brilliant, and of a style peculiarly your own. If you do not object, we will hurry ourselves, for the sea, I perceive, is rising fast, and night is setting in." "My reason for not walking faster was, that I did not wish to precede your grace. Are you still on dry land, my lord?" "Yes, at present I am. Look yonder. My servants are afraid we shall be drowned, and have converted the boat into a cruiser. Do you remark how curiously it dances upon the crests of the waves? But, as it makes me feel seasick, would you permit me to turn my back towards them?" "You will observe, my lord, that in turning your back to them, you will have the sun full in your face." "Oh, its rays are feeble at this hour, and it will soon disappear. Do not be uneasy on that score." "As you please, my lord. It was out of consideration for your lordship that I made the remark." "I am aware of that, Monsieur de Ward, and I fully appreciate your kindness. Shall we take off our doublets?" "As you please, my lord." "Do not hesitate to tell me, Monsieur de Ward, if you do not feel comfortable upon the wet sand, or if you think yourself a little too close to French territory. We could fight in England, or even upon my yacht." "We are exceedingly well placed here, my lord. Only I have the honor to remark that, as the sea is rising fast, we have hardly time." Buckingham made a sign of assent, took off his doublet, and threw it on the ground, a proceeding which the ward imitated. Both their bodies, which seemed like phantoms to those who were looking at them from the shore, were thrown strongly into relief by the dark red-violet colored shadow with which the sky became overspread. "Upon my word, your grace," said the ward, "we shall hardly have time to begin. Do you not perceive how our feet are sinking into the sand?" "I have sunk up to my ankles," said Buckingham, "without reckoning that the water is even now breaking in upon us." "It has already reached me. As soon as you please, therefore, your grace, said the ward, who drew his sword, a movement imitated by the duke. Monsieur the ward, said Buckingham, one final word. I am about to fight you because I do not like you, because you have wounded me in ridiculing a certain devotional regard I have entertained, and one which I acknowledge that, at this moment, I still retain, and for which I would very willingly die. You are a bad and heartless man, Monsieur de Ward, and I will do my very utmost to take your life. For I feel assured that, if you survive this engagement, you will, in the future, work great mischief towards my friends. That is all I have to remark, Monsieur de Ward, concluded Buckingham as he saluted him. And I, my lord, have only this to reply to you. I have not disliked you hitherto, but since you give me such a character, I hate you, and will do all I possibly can to kill you. And the ward saluted Buckingham. Their swords crossed at the same moment, like two flashes of lightning on a dark night. The swords seemed to seek each other, guessed their position, and met. Both were practised swordsmen, and the earlier passes were without any result. The night was fast closing in, and it was so dark that they attacked and defended themselves almost instinctively. Suddenly the ward felt his sword arrested. He had just touched Buckingham's shoulder. The duke's sword sunk as his arm was lowered. "You are wounded, my lord," said the ward, drawing back a step or two. "Yes, monsieur, but only slightly." "Yet you quitted your guard." "Only from the first effect of the cold steel, but I have recovered. Let us go on, if you please." And disengaging his sword with a sinister clashing of the blade, the duke wounded the marquis in the breast. "A hit?" he said. "No," cried the ward, not moving from his place. "I beg your pardon, but observing that your shirt was stained," said Buckingham. "Well," said the ward furiously, "it is now your turn." And with a terrible lunge he pierced Buckingham's arm, the sword passing between the two bones. Buckingham, feeling his right arm paralyzed, stretched out his left, seized his sword, which was about falling from his nerveless grasp, and before the ward could resume his guard, he thrust him through the breast. The ward tottered, his knees gave way beneath him, and leaving his sword still fixed in the duke's arm, he fell into the water, which was soon crimsoned with a more genuine reflection than that which it had borrowed from the clouds. The ward was not dead, and felt the terrible danger that menaced him, for the sea rose fast. The duke too perceived the danger. With an effort and an exclamation of pain, he tore out the blade which remained in his arm, and turning towards the ward said, "Are you dead, Marquis?" "No," replied the ward, in a voice choked by the blood which rushed from his lungs to his throat, but very near it. "Well, what is to be done? Can you walk?" said Buckingham, supporting him on his knee. "Impossible," he replied. Then, falling down again, said, "Call to your people, or I shall be drowned." "Hallo! Both there! Quick, quick!" The boat flew over the waves, but the sea rose faster than the boat could approach. Buckingham saw the ward was on the point of being again covered by a wave. He passed his left arm, safe and unwounded, round his body and raised him up. The wave ascended to his waist, but did not move him. The duke immediately began to carry his late antagonist towards the shore. he had hardly gone 10 paces when a second wave, rushing onwards higher, more furious and menacing than the former, struck him at the height of his chest, threw him over, and buried him beneath the water. As the reflux, however, the Duke and the ward were discovered lying on the strand. The ward had fainted. At this moment 4 of the Duke's sailors, who comprehended the danger, threw themselves into the sea, and in a moment were close beside him. Their terror was extreme when they observed how their master became covered with blood, in proportion to the water with which it was impregnated flowed towards his knees and feet. They wished to carry him. "No, no," exclaimed the Duke, "take the Marquis on shore first." "That to the Frenchmen!" cried the English sullenly. "Wretched knaves!" exclaimed the Duke, drawing himself up with a haughty gesture, which sprinkled them with blood. "Obey directly. Monsieur de Ward's on shore. Monsieur de Ward's safety to be looked to first, or I will have you all hanged." The boat had by this time reached them. The secretary and steward leaped into the sea and approached the Marquis, who no longer showed any sign of life. "I commit him to your care, as you value your lives," said the Duke. "Take Monsieur the Marquis on shore." They took him in their arms and carried him to the dry sand, where the tide never rose so high. A few idlers and 5 or 6 fishermen had gathered on the shore, attracted by the strange spectacle of 2 men fighting with the water up to their knees. The fishermen, observing a group of men approaching, carrying a wounded man, entered the sea until the water was up to their waist. The English transferred the wounded man to them. At the very moment the latter began to open his eyes again, the salt water and the fine sand had got into his wounds and caused him the acutest pain. The Duke's secretary drew out a purse filled with gold from his pocket, and handed it to the one among those present who appeared of most importance, saying, "From my master, his Grace the Duke of Buckingham, in order that every possible care may be taken on the Marquis de Ward." Then, followed by those who had accompanied him, he returned to the boat, which Buckingham had been enabled to reach with the greatest difficulty, but only after he had seen the Ward out of danger. By this time it was high tide. Embroidered coats and silk sashes were lost. Many hats, too, had been carried away by the waves. The flow of the tide had borne the Duke's and the Ward's clothes to the shore, and the Ward was wrapped in the Duke's doublet, under the belief that it was his own, when the fishermen carried him in their arms towards the town. End of chapter 29. Le Terrain de Dieu. Recording by Filippo Joachim.
Of 10 years later. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to find out how you can volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Eden Ray Hedrick. 10 Years Later by Alexandre Dumas. Chapter 30. Threefold Love. As soon as Buckingham departed, Guiche imagined the coast would be perfectly clear for him without any interference. Monsieur, who no longer retained the slightest feeling of jealousy, and who, besides, permitted himself to be monopolized by the Chevalier de Lorraine, allowed as much liberty and freedom in his house as the most exacting could desire. The king, on his side, who had conceived a strong predilection for his sister-in-law's society, invented a variety of amusements in quick succession to each other, in order to render her residence in Paris as cheerful as possible, so that, in fact, not a day passed without a ball at the Palais Royal or a reception in Monsieur's apartments. The king had directed that Fontainebleau should be prepared for the reception of the court, and everyone was using his utmost interest to get invited. Madame led a life of incessant occupation; neither her voice nor her pen were idle for a moment. The conversations with De Guiche were gradually assuming a tone of interest, which might unmistakably be recognized as the prelude of a deep-seated attachment. When eyes looked languishingly while the subject under discussion happens to be colors of material for dresses, when a whole hour is occupied in analyzing the merits and the perfume of a sachet or a flower, there are words in this style of conversation which everyone might listen to, but there are gestures and sighs that everyone cannot perceive. After Madame had talked for some time with De Guiche, she conversed with the king, who paid her a visit regularly every day. They played, wrote verses, or selected mottos or emblematical devices. This spring was not only the Maytide of nature, it was the youth of an entire people, of which those at court were the head. The king was handsome, young, and of unequaled gallantry. All women were passionately loved by him, even the queen his wife. This mighty monarch was, however, more timid and more reserved than any other person in the kingdom, to such a degree, indeed, that he did not confess his sentiments even to himself. This timidity of bearing restrained him within the limits of ordinary politeness, and no woman could boast of having any preference shown to her beyond that which was shown to others. It might be foretold that the day when his real character would be displayed would be the dawn of a new sovereignty, but as yet he had not declared himself. M. de Guiche took advantage of this, and constituted himself the sovereign prince of the whole laughter-loving court. It had been reported that he was on the best of terms with Mademoiselle de Montalais, that he had been assiduously attentive to Mademoiselle de Chatillon, but now he was not even barely civil to any of the court beauties. He had eyes and ears for one person alone. In this manner, and as it were without design, he devoted himself to Monsieur, who had a great regard for him, and kept him as much as possible in his own apartments. Unsociable from natural disposition, he estranged himself too much previous to the arrival of Madame, but, after her arrival, he did not estrange himself sufficiently. This conduct, which everyone had observed, had been particularly remarked by the evil genius of the house, the Chevalier de Lorraine, for whom Monsieur exhibited the warmest attachment, because he was of a very cheerful disposition, even in his remarks most full of malice, and because he was never at a loss how to while the time away. The Chevalier de Lorraine, therefore, having noticed that he was threatened with being supplanted by De Guiche, resorted to strong measures. He disappeared from the court, leaving Monsieur much embarrassed. The first day of his absence, Monsieur hardly inquired about him, for he had De Guiche with him, and, except the time given to conversation with Madame, his days and nights were rigorously devoted to the prince. On the second day, however, Monsieur, finding no one near him, inquired where the chevalier was. He was told that no one knew. De Guiche, after having spent the morning in selecting embroideries and fringes with Madame, went to console the prince. But after dinner, as there were some amethysts to be looked at, De Guiche returned to Madame's cabinet. Monsieur was left quite to himself during the time devoted to dressing and decorating himself. He felt that he was the most miserable of men, and again inquired whether there was any news of the chevalier, in reply to which he was told that no one could tell where the chevalier was to be found. Monsieur, hardly knowing in what direction to inflict his weariness, went to Madame's apartments dressed in his morning gown. He found a large assemblage of people there, laughing and whispering in every part of the room. At one end, a group of women around one of the courtiers, talking together amid smothered bursts of laughter. At the other end, Manicamp and Malicorne were being pillaged at cards by Montalais and Mademoiselle de Tonnay-Charente, while two others were standing by, laughing. In another part were Madame, seated upon some cushions on the floor, and De Guiche, on his knees beside her, spreading out a handful of pearls and precious stones, while the princess, with her white and slender fingers, pointed out such among them as pleased her most. Again, in another corner of the room, a guitar player was playing some of the Spanish seguidillas, to which Madame had taken the greatest fancy, ever since she had heard them sung by the young queen, with a melancholy expression of voice. But the songs which the Spanish princess had sung with tears in her eyes, the young Englishwoman was humming with a smile that well displayed her beautiful teeth. The cabinet presented, in fact, the most perfect representation of unrestrained pleasure and amusement. As he entered, Monsieur was struck at beholding so many persons enjoying themselves without him. He was so jealous at the sight that he could not resist exclaiming, like a child, "What! You are amusing yourselves here, while I am sick and tired of being alone?" The sound of his voice was like a clap of thunder coming to interrupt the warbling of birds under the leafy covert of the trees. A dead silence ensued. De Guiche was on his feet in a moment. Malicorne tried to hide himself behind Montalais. Manicamp stood bolt upright, and assumed a very ceremonious demeanor. the guitar player thrust his instrument under a table, covering it with a piece of carpet to conceal it from the prince's observation. Madame was the only one who did not move, and, smiling at her husband, said, "Is not this the hour you usually devote to your toilette?"
"An hour which others select, it seems, for amusing themselves," replied the prince, grumblingly.
This untoward remark was the signal for a general rout. The women fled like a flock of terrified starlings, the guitar player vanished like a shadow. Malicorne, still protected by Montalais, who purposely widened out her dress, glided behind the hanging tapestry. As for Manicamp, he went to the assistance of De Guiche, who naturally remained near Madame, and both of them, with the princess herself, courageously sustained the attack. The count was too happy to bear malice against the husband, but Monsieur bore a grudge against his wife. Nothing was wanting but a quarrel, he sought it, and the hurried departure of the crowd, which had been so joyous before he arrived, and so disturbed by his interest, furnished him with a pretext.
"Why do they run at the very sight of me?"
he inquired in a supercilious tone, to which remark Madame replied that whenever the master of the house made his appearance, the family kept aloof out of respect. As she said this, she made so funny and so pretty a grimace that De Guiche and Manicamp could not control themselves; they burst into a peal of laughter. Madame followed their example, and even Monsieur himself could not resist it, and he was obliged to sit down, as, for laughing, he could scarcely keep his equilibrium. However, he very soon left off, but his anger had increased. He was still more furious because he had permitted himself to laugh than from having seen others laugh. He looked at Manicamp steadily, not venturing to show his anger towards De Guiche, but, at a sign which displayed no little amount of annoyance, Manicamp and De Guiche left the room, so that Madame, left alone, began sadly to pick up her pearls and amethysts, no longer smiling, and speaking still less.
"I am very happy," said the duke, "to find myself treated as a stranger here, Madame."
And he left the room in a passion. On his way out, he met Montalais, who was in attendance in the anteroom.
"It is very agreeable to pay you a visit here, but outside the door."
Montalais made a very low obeisance. "I do not quite understand what your royal highness does me the honor to say."
"I say that when you are all laughing together in Madame's apartments, he is an unwelcome visitor who does not remain outside."
"Your royal highness does not think, and does not speak, of yourself."
"On the contrary, it is on my own account that I do speak and think. I have no reason, certainly, to flatter myself about the reception I meet with here at any time. How is it that, on the very day there is music and a little society in Madame's apartments, in my own apartments indeed, for they are mine, on the very day that I wish to amuse myself a little in my turn, everyone runs away? Are they afraid of me? Are they afraid to see me, that they all take wing as soon as I appear? Is there anything wrong, then, going on in my absence?"
"Yet nothing has been done today, monseigneur, which is not done every day."
"What? Do they laugh like that every day?"
"Why, yes, monseigneur."
"The same group of people simpering and the same singing and strumming going on every day?"
"The guitar, monseigneur, was introduced today, but when we have no guitars, we have violins and flutes. Ladies soon weary without music."
"The deuce! And the men?"
"What men, monseigneur?"
"Monsieur de Guiche, Monsieur de Manicamp, and the rest of them?"
"They all belong to your highness's household."
"Yes, yes, you are right," said the prince as he returned to his own apartments, full of thought. He threw himself into the largest of his armchairs without looking at himself in the glass. "Where can the chevalier be?" said he.
One of the prince's attendants happened to be near him, overheard his remark, and replied, "No one knows, your highness."
"Still the same answer. The first who answers me again, 'I do not know,' I will discharge."
Everyone at this remark hurried out of his apartments in the same manner as the others had fled from Madame's apartments. The prince then flew into the wildest rage. He kicked over a chiffonier, which tumbled on the carpet, broken in pieces. He next went into the galleries, and, with the greatest coolness, threw down, one after another, an enameled vase, a porphyry ewer, and a bronze candelabrum. The noise summoned everyone to the various doors. "What is your highness's pleasure?" said the captain of the guards, timidly.
"I am treating myself to some music," replied the prince, gnashing his teeth.
The captain of the guard desired his royal highness's physician to be sent for. But before he came, Malicorne arrived, saying to the prince, "Monseigneur, the Chevalier de Lorraine is here." The duke looked at Malicorne and smiled graciously at him, just as the chevalier entered. Chapter 30. One of 10 years later. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to find out how you can volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Eden Ray Hedrick. 10 years later, by Alexandre Dumas. Chapter 31. Monsieur de Lorraine's Jealousy. The Duc d'Orléans uttered a cry of delight on perceiving the Chevalier de Lorraine.
"This is fortunate indeed," he said. "By what happy chance do I see you? Had you indeed disappeared, as everyone assured me?"
"Yes, monseigneur."
"A caprice?"
"I to venture upon caprices with your highness? The respect—"
"Put respect out of the way, for you fail in it every day. I absolve you, but why did you leave me?"
"Because I felt that I was of no further use to you."
"Explain yourself."
"Your highness has people about you who are far more amusing than I can ever be. I felt I was not strong enough to enter into contest with them, and I therefore withdrew."
"This extreme diffidence shows a want of common sense. Who are those with whom you cannot contend? De Guiche?"
"I name no one."
"This is absurd. Does De Guiche annoy you?"
"I do not say he does. Do not force me to speak, however. You know very well that De Guiche is one of our best friends."
"Who is it, then?"
"Excuse me, monseigneur, let us say no more about it." The chevalier knew perfectly well that curiosity is excited in the same way as thirst, by removing that which quenches it, or, in other words, by denying an explanation. "No, no," said the prince, "I wish to know why you went away." "In that case, monseigneur, I will tell you, but do not get angry. I remarked that my presence was disagreeable."
"To whom?"
"To Madame."
"What do you mean?"
said the duke in astonishment. "It is simple enough. Madame is very probably jealous of the regard you are good enough to testify for me."
"Has she shown it to you?"
"Madame never addresses a syllable to me, particularly since a certain time."
"Since what time?"
"Since the time when, Monsieur de Guiche having made himself more agreeable to her than I could, she receives him at every and any hour." The duke colored.
"At any hour, chevalier? What do you mean by that?"
"You see, your highness, I have already displeased you. I was quite sure I should."
"I am not displeased, but what you say is rather startling. In what respect does Madame prefer De Guiche to you?"
"I shall say no more," said the chevalier, saluting the prince ceremoniously.
"On the contrary, I require you to speak. If you withdraw on that account, you must indeed be very jealous."
"One cannot help being jealous, monseigneur, when one loves. Is not your royal highness jealous of Madame? Would you not, if you saw someone always near Madame, and always treated with great favor, take umbrage at it? One's friends are as one's lovers. Your highness has sometimes conferred the distinguished honor upon me of calling me your friend."
"Yes, yes, but you used a phrase which has a very equivocal significance. You are unfortunate in your phrases."
"What phrase, monseigneur?"
"You said 'treated with great favor.' What do you mean by favor?"
"Nothing can be more simple," said the chevalier, with an expression of great frankness. "For instance, whenever a husband remarks that his wife summons such and such a man near her, whenever this man is always to be found by her side, or in attendance at the door of her carriage, whenever the bouquet of one is always the same color as the ribbons of the other, when music and supper parties are held in private apartments, whenever a dead silence takes place immediately the husband makes his appearance in his wife's rooms, and when the husband suddenly finds that he has, as a companion, the most devoted and kindest of men, who, a week before, was with him as little as possible, why then—"
"Well, finish."
"Why then, I say, monseigneur, one possibly may get jealous. But all these details hardly apply, for our conversation had nothing to do with them." The duke was evidently very much agitated, and seemed to struggle with himself a good deal.
"You have not told me," he then remarked, "why you absented yourself. A little while ago you said it was from a fear of intruding. You added even that you had observed a disposition on Madame's part to encourage De Guiche."
"Pardon me, monseigneur, I did not say that."
"You did indeed."
"Well, if I did say so, I observed nothing but what was very inoffensive."
"At all events, you remarked something."
"You embarrass me, monseigneur."
"What does that matter? Answer me. If you speak the truth, why should you feel embarrassed?"
"I always speak the truth, monseigneur, but I also always hesitate when it is a question of repeating what others say."
"Ah, repeat? It appears that it is talked about, then."
"I acknowledge that others have spoken to me on the subject."
"Who?" said the prince.
The chevalier assumed an almost angry air as he replied, Monseigneur, you are subjecting me to cross-examination. You treat me as a criminal at the bar. The rumors which idly pass by a gentleman's ears do not remain there. Your highness wishes me to magnify rumor until it attains the importance of an event.
However, said the duke, in great displeasure, the fact remains that you withdrew on account of this report.
To speak the truth, others have talked to me of the attentions of M. de Guiche to Madame. Nothing more. Perfectly harmless, I repeat, and more than that, allowable. But do not be unjust, monseigneur, and do not attach any undue importance to it. It does not concern you.
Monsieur de Guiche's attentions to Madame do not concern me.
No, monseigneur, and what I say to you I would say to de Guiche himself, so little do I think of the attentions he pays Madame. Nay, I would say it even to Madame herself. Only, you understand what I am afraid of. I am afraid of being thought jealous of the favor shown, when I am only jealous as far as friendship is concerned. I know your disposition. I know that when you bestow your affections you become exclusively attached. You love Madame, and indeed, who would not love her? Follow me attentively as I proceed. Madame has noticed among your friends the handsomest and most fascinating of them all. She will begin to influence you on his behalf in such a way that you will neglect the others. Your indifference would kill me. It is already bad enough to have to support Madame's indifference. I have, therefore, made up my mind to give way to the favorite whose happiness I envy, even while I acknowledge my sincere friendship and sincere admiration for him. Well, monseigneur, do you see anything to object to in this reasoning? Is it not that of a man of honor? Is my conduct that of a sincere friend? Answer me, at least, after having so closely questioned me.
The duke had seated himself, with his head buried in his hands. After a silence long enough to enable the chevalier to judge the effect of this oratorical display, the duke arose, saying, "Come, be candid."
As I always am.
Very well. You know that we already observed something respecting that mad fellow Buckingham.
Do not say anything against Madame, monseigneur, or I shall take my leave. It is impossible you can be suspicious of Madame.
No, no, chevalier, I do not suspect Madame, but in fact I observe, I compare.
Buckingham was a madman, monseigneur.
A madman about whom, however, you opened my eyes thoroughly.
No, no, said the chevalier quickly. It was not I who opened your eyes. It was De Guiche. Do not confound us, I beg.
And he began to laugh in so harsh a manner that it sounded like the hiss of a serpent. Yes, yes, I remember. You said a few words, but De Guiche showed the most jealousy.
I should think so, continued the chevalier in the same tone. He was fighting for home and altar.
What did you say? Said the duke haughtily, thoroughly roused by this insidious jest.
Am I not right? For does not Monsieur de Guiche hold the chief post of honor in your household?
Well, replied the duke, somewhat calmed, has this passion of Buckingham been remarked?
Certainly.
Very well. Do people say that Monsieur de Guiche's is remarked as much?
Pardon me, monseigneur, you are again mistaken. No one says that Monsieur de Guiche entertains anything of the sort.
Very good.
You see, monseigneur, that it would have been better, 100 times better, to have left me in my retirement, than to have allowed you to conjure up, by aid of any scruples I may have had, suspicions which Madame will regard as crimes. And she would be in the right, too.
What would you do?
Act reasonably.
In what way?
I should not pay the slightest attention to the society of these new Epicurean philosophers, and, in that way, the rumors will cease.
Well, I will see. I will think it over.
Oh, you have time enough. The danger is not great, and then, besides, it is not a question of danger or of passion. It all arose from a fear I had to see your friendship for me decrease. From the very moment you restore it, with so kind an assurance of its existence, I have no longer any other idea in my head.
The duke shook his head as if he meant to say, if you have no more ideas, I have, though. It being now the dinner hour, the prince sent to inform Madame of it, but she returned a message to the effect that she could not be present, but would dine in her own apartment. That is not my fault, said the duke. This morning, having taken them by surprise in the midst of a musical party, I got jealous, and so they are in sulks with me.
We will dine alone, said the chevalier with a sigh. I regret De Guiche is not here.
Oh, De Guiche will not remain long in the sulks. He is a very good-natured fellow.
Monseigneur, said the chevalier suddenly, an excellent idea has struck me in our conversation just now. I may have exasperated your highness and caused you some dissatisfaction. It is but fitting that I should be the mediator. I will go and look for the count and bring him back with me."
Ah, chevalier, you are really a very good-natured fellow.
"You say that as if you were surprised."
Well, you are not so tender-hearted every day."
"That may be, but confess that I know how to repair a wrong I may have done."
"I confess that."
"Will your highness do me the favor to wait here for a few minutes?"
"Willingly. Be off, and I will try on my Fontainebleau costume."
The chevalier left the room, called his different attendants with the greatest care, as if he were giving them different orders. All went off in various directions, but he retained his valet de chambre. "Ascertain, and immediately too, if M. de Guiche is not in Madame's apartments. How can one learn it?"
"Very easily, monsieur. I will ask Malicorne, who will find out from Mademoiselle de Montalais. I may as well tell you, however, that the inquiry will be useless, for all M. de Guiche's attendants are gone, and he must have left with them."
"Ascertain, nevertheless." 10 minutes had hardly passed when the valet returned. He beckoned his master mysteriously toward the servants' staircase, and showed him into a small room with a window looking out upon the garden. "What is the matter?" said the chevalier. "Why so many precautions?"
"Look, monsieur," said the valet, "look yonder under the walnut tree."
"Ah," said the chevalier, "I see Manicamp there. What is he waiting for?"
"You will see in a moment, monsieur, if you wait patiently. There, do you see now?"
"I see 1, 2, 4 musicians with their instruments, and behind them, urging them on, De Guiche himself. What is he doing there, though?"
"He is waiting until the little door of the staircase belonging to the ladies of honor is opened. By that staircase he will ascend to Madame's apartments, where some pieces of music are going to be performed during dinner."
"This is admirable news, you tell me."
"Is it not, monsieur?"
"Was it M. de Malicorne who told you this?"
"Yes, monsieur."
"He likes you, then?"
"No, monsieur, it is monsieur that he likes."
"Why?"
"Because he wishes to belong to his household."
"And most certainly he shall. How much did he give you for that?"
"The secret, which I now dispose of to you, monsieur."
"And which I buy for 100 pistoles. Take them."
"Thank you, monsieur. Look, look, the little door opens. A woman admits the musicians."
"It is Montalais."
"Hush, monseigneur, do not call out her name. Whoever says Montalais says Malicorne. If you quarrel with the one, you will be on bad terms with the other."
"Very well, I have seen nothing."
"And I," said the valet, pocketing the purse, "have received nothing."
The chevalier, being now certain that Guiche had entered, returned to the prince, whom he found splendidly dressed and radiant with joy as with good looks. "I am told," he exclaimed, "that the king has taken the sun as his device. Really, monseigneur, it is you whom this device would best suit."
"Where is De Guiche?"
"He cannot be found. He has fled, has evaporated entirely. Your scolding of this morning terrified him. He could not be found in his apartments."
"Bah! The hare-brained fellow is capable of setting off post haste to his own estates. Poor man, we will recall him. Come, let us dine now."
"Monseigneur, today is a very festival of ideas. I have another."
"What is it?"
"Madame is angry with you, and she has reason to be so. You owe her revenge. Go and dine with her."
"Oh, that would be acting like a weak and whimsical husband."
"It is the duty of a good husband to do so. The princess is no doubt wearied enough. She will be weeping at her plate, and her eyes will get quite red. A husband who is the cause of his wife's eyes getting red is an odious creature. Come, monseigneur, come."
"I cannot, for I have directed dinner to be served here."
"Yet see, monseigneur, how dull we shall be. I shall be low spirited, because I know that Madame will be alone. You, hard and savage as you wish to appear, will be sighing all the while. Take me with you to Madame's dinner, and that will be a delightful surprise. I am sure we shall be very merry. You were in the wrong this morning."
"Well, perhaps I was."
"There is no perhaps at all, for it is a fact you were so."
"Chevalier, chevalier, your advice is not good."
"Nay, my advice is good. All the advantages are on your own side. Your violet colored suit, embroidered with gold, becomes you admirably. Madame will be as much vanquished by the man as by the action. Come, monseigneur."
"You decide me. Let us go."
The duke left his room, accompanied by the chevalier, and went toward Madame's apartments. The chevalier hastily whispered to the valet, "Be sure there are some people before that little door, so that no one can escape in that direction. Run, run!" And he followed the duke toward the antechambers of Madame's suite of apartments, and when the ushers were about to announce them, the chevalier said, laughing, "His highness wishes to surprise Madame." Chapter 31.
10 years later. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Emily Fuca. 10 Years Later by Alexandre Dumas. Chapter 32. Monsieur is jealous of Guiche. Monsieur entered the room abruptly, as persons do who mean well and think they confer pleasure, or as those who hope to surprise some secret, the terrible reward of jealous people. Madame, almost out of her senses with joy at the first bars of music, was dancing in the most unrestrained manner, leaving the dinner, which had already begun, unfinished. Her partner was M. de Guiche, who, with his arms raised, and his eyes half closed, was kneeling on one knee like the Spanish dancers, with looks full of passion and gestures of the most caressing character. The princess was dancing round him with a responsive smile, and the same air of alluring seductiveness. Montalais stood by admiringly. La Valliere, seated in a corner of the room, looked on thoughtfully. It is impossible to describe the effect which the presence of the prince produced upon this gleeful company, and it would be equally impossible to describe the effect which the sight of their happiness produced on Philippe. The Comte de Guiche had no power to move. Madame remained in the middle of one of the figures and of an attitude, unable to utter a word. The Chevalier de Lorraine, leaning his back against the doorway, smiled like a man in the very height of the frankest admiration. The pallor of the prince and the convulsive twitching of his hands and limbs were the first symptoms that struck those present. A dead silence succeeded the merry music of the dance. The Chevalier de Lorraine took advantage of this interval to salute Madame and De Guiche most respectfully, affecting to join them together in his reverences, as though they were the master and mistress of the house. Monsieur then approached them, saying in a hoarse tone of voice, "I am delighted. I came here expecting to find you ill and low-spirited, and I find you abandoning yourself to new amusements. Really, it is most fortunate. My house is the pleasantest in the kingdom." Then turning towards De Guiche, "Comte," he said, "I did not know you were so good a dancer." And again addressing his wife, he said, "Show a little more consideration for me, madame. Whenever you intend to amuse yourself here, invite me. I am a prince, unfortunately, very much neglected." Guiche had now recovered his self-possession, and with the spirited boldness which was natural to him, and sat so well upon him, he said, "Your highness knows very well that my very life is at your service, and whenever there is a question of it being needed, I am ready. But today, as it is only a question of dancing to music, I dance." "And you are perfectly right," said the prince, coldly. "But, madame," he continued, "you do not remark that your ladies deprive me of my friends. M. de Guiche does not belong to you, madame, but to me. If you wish to dine without me, you have your ladies. When I dine alone, I have my gentlemen. Do not strip me of everything." Madame felt the reproach and the lesson, and the color rushed to her face. "Monsieur," she replied, "I was not aware when I came to the court of France, that princesses of my rank were to be regarded as the women in Turkey are. I was not aware that we were not allowed to be seen. But since such is your desire, I will conform myself to it. Pray do not hesitate, if you should wish it, to have my windows barred even." This repartee, which made Montalais and De Guiche smile, rekindled the prince's anger, no inconsiderable portion of which had already evaporated in words. "Very well," he said in a concentrated tone of voice. "This is the way in which I am respected in my own house." "Monseigneur, monseigneur," murmured the chevalier in the duke's ear, in such a manner that everyone could observe he was endeavoring to calm him. "Come," replied the prince, as his only answer to the remark, hurrying him away and turning round with so hasty a movement that he almost ran against Madame. The chevalier followed him into his own apartment, where the prince had no sooner seated himself than he gave free vent to his fury. The chevalier raised his eyes towards the ceiling, joined his hands together, and said not a word. "Give me your opinion," exclaimed the prince. "Upon what?" "Upon what is taking place here." "Oh, monseigneur, it is a very serious matter." "It is abominable. I cannot live in this manner." "How miserable all this is," said the chevalier. "We hoped to enjoy tranquillity after that madman Buckingham had left." and this is worse." "I do not say that, monseigneur." "Yes, but I say it, for Buckingham would never have ventured upon a fourth part of what we have just now seen." "What do you mean?" "To conceal oneself for the purposes of dancing, and to feign indisposition in order to dine tete a tete." "No, no, monseigneur." "Yes, yes," exclaimed the prince, exciting himself like a self willed child; "but I will not endure it any longer. I must learn what is really going on." "Oh, monseigneur, an exposure! By Heaven, monsieur, shall I put myself out of the way when people show so little consideration for me? Wait for me here, chevalier, wait for me here." The prince disappeared in the neighboring apartment, and inquired of the gentleman in attendance if the queen mother had returned from chapel. Anne of Austria felt that her happiness was now complete. Peace restored to her family, a nation delighted with the presence of a young monarch who had shown an aptitude for affairs of great importance. The revenues of the state increased, external peace assured, everything seemed to promise a tranquil future. Her thoughts recurred now and then to the poor young nobleman whom she had received as a mother, and had driven away as a hard hearted stepmother, and she sighed as she thought of him. Suddenly the Duc d'Orleans entered her room. "Dear mother," he exclaimed hurriedly, closing the door, "things cannot go on as they are now." Anne of Austria raised her beautiful eyes towards him, and with an unmoved suavity of manner, said, "What do you allude to?" "I wish to speak of Madame." "Your wife?" "Yes, Madame." "I suppose that silly fellow Buckingham has been writing a farewell letter to her." "Oh, yes, Madame, of course it is a question of Buckingham." "Of whom else could it be, then? For that poor fellow was, wrongly enough, the object of your jealousy, and I thought " "My wife, Madame, has already replaced the Duke of Buckingham." "Philip, what are you saying? You are speaking very heedlessly." "No, no, Madame has so managed matters that I am still jealous." "Of whom, in Heaven's name?" "Is it possible you have not remarked it? Have you not noticed that M. de Guiche is always in her apartments, always with her?" The queen clapped her hands together, and began to laugh. "Philip," she said, "your jealousy is not merely a defect, it is a disease." "Whether a defect or a disease, Madame, I am the sufferer from it." "And do you imagine that a complaint which exists only in your own imagination can be cured? You wish it to be said you are right in being jealous, when there is no ground whatever for your jealousy. Of course, you will begin to say for this gentleman what you already said on the behalf of the other." "Because, Philip," said the queen, dryly, "what you did for the other, you are going to do for this one." The prince bowed, slightly annoyed. "If I give you facts," he said, "will you believe me?" "If it regarded anything else but jealousy, I would believe you without your bringing facts forward; but as jealousy is the case, I promise nothing." "It is just the same as if your majesty were to desire me to hold my tongue, and sent me away unheard." "Far from it; you are my son, I owe you a mother's indulgence." "Oh, say what you think; you owe me as much indulgence as a madman deserves." "Do not exaggerate, Philip, and take care how you represent your wife to me as a woman of depraved mind. But facts, mother, facts." "Well, I am listening." "This morning at 10 o'clock they were playing music in Madame's apartments." "No harm in that, surely." "M. de Guiche was talking with her alone. Ah! I forgot to tell you that during the last 10 days he has never left her side." "If they were doing any harm, they would hide themselves." "Very good," exclaimed the duke; "I expected you to say that. Pray remember with precision the words you have just uttered. This morning I took them by surprise, and showed my dissatisfaction in a very marked manner." "Rely upon it, that is quite sufficient. It was, perhaps, even a little too much. These young women easily take offense. To reproach them for an error they have not committed is, sometimes, almost equivalent to telling them they might be guilty of even worse." "Very good, very good. But wait a minute; do not forget what you have just this moment said, that this morning's lessons ought to have been sufficient, and that if they had been doing what was wrong, they would have hidden themselves." "Yes, I said so." "Well, just now, repenting of my hastiness of the morning, and imagining that Guiche was sulking in his own apartments, I went to pay Madame a visit. Can you guess what, or whom I found there? Another set of musicians, more dancing, and Guiche himself. He He was concealed there. Anne of Austria frowned. It was imprudent, she said. What did Madame say? Nothing. And Guiche? As much. Oh no, he muttered some impertinent remark or another. Well, what is your opinion, Philippe? That I have been made a fool of, that Buckingham was only a pretext, and that Guiche is the one who is really to blame in the matter. Anne shrugged her shoulders. Well, she said, what else? I wish De Guiche to be dismissed from my household, as Buckingham was, and I shall ask the king, unless what? Unless you, my dear mother, who are so clever and so kind, will execute the commission yourself. I will not do it, Philippe. What, madame? Listen, Philippe, I am not disposed to pay people ill compliments every day. I have some influence over young people, but I cannot take advantage of it without running the chances of losing it altogether. Besides, there is nothing to prove that M. de Guiche is guilty. He has displeased me. That is your own affair. Very well, I know what I shall do, said the prince impetuously. Anne looked at him with some uneasiness. What did you intend to do? She said. I will have him drowned in my fish pond the very next time I find him in my apartments again. Having launched this terrible threat, the prince expected his mother would be frightened out of her senses, but the queen was unmoved. Do so, she said. Philippe was as weak as a woman, and began to cry out, Everyone betrays me, no one cares for me, my mother even joins my enemies. Your mother, Philippe, sees further in the matter than you do, and does not care about advising you, since you will not listen to her. I will go to the king. I was about to propose that to you. I am now expecting his majesty. It is the hour he usually pays me a visit. Explain the matter to him yourself. She had hardly finished when Philippe heard the door of the anteroom open with some noise. He began to feel nervous. At the sound of the king's footsteps, which could be heard upon the carpet, the duke hurriedly made his escape. Anne of Austria could not resist laughing, and was laughing still when the king entered. He came very affectionately to inquire after the even now uncertain health of the queen mother, and to announce to her that the preparations for the journey to Fontainebleau were complete. Seeing her laugh, his uneasiness on her account diminished, and he addressed her in a vivacious tone himself. Anne of Austria took him by the hand, and, in a voice full of playfulness, said, Do you know, sire, that I am proud of being a Spanish woman? Why, madame? Because Spanish women are worth more than English women, at least. Explain yourself. Since your marriage you have not, I believe, had a single reproach to make against the queen. Certainly not. And you, too, have been married some time. Your brother, on the contrary, has been married but a fortnight. Well? He is now finding fault with Madame a second time. What, Buckingham still? No, another. Who? Guiche. Really? Madame is a coquette, then? I fear so. My poor brother, said the king, laughing. You don't object to coquettes, it seems. In Madame, certainly I do. But Madame is not a coquette at heart. That may be, but your brother is excessively angry about it. What does he want? He wants to drown Guiche. That is a violent measure to resort to. Do not laugh, he is extremely irritated. Think of what can be done. To save Guiche, certainly. If your brother heard you, he would conspire against you as your uncle did against your father. No, Philippe has too much affection for me for that, and I, on my side, have too great a regard for him. We shall live together on very good terms. But what is the substance of his request? That you will prevent Madame from being a coquette, and Guiche from being amiable. Is that all? My brother has an exalted idea of sovereign power. To reform a man, not to speak about reforming a woman. How will you set about it? With a word to Guiche, who is a clever fellow, I will undertake to convince him. But Madame? That is more difficult. A word will not be enough. I will compose a homily and read it to her. There is no time to be lost. Oh, I will use the utmost diligence. There is a repetition of the ballet this afternoon. You will read her a lecture while you are dancing? Yes, madame. You promise to convert her. I will root out the heresy altogether, either by convincing her, or by extreme measures. That is all right, then. Do not mix me up in the affair. Madame would never forgive me all her life, and as a mother in law I ought to desire to live on good terms with my new found daughter. The king, madame, will take all upon himself. But let me reflect. What about? It would be better, perhaps, if I were to go and see Madame in her own apartment. Would that not seem a somewhat serious step to take? Yes, but seriousness is not unbecoming in preachers, and the music of the ballet would drown half my arguments. Besides, the object is to prevent any violent measures on my brother's part, so that a little precipitation may be advisable. Is Madame in her own apartment? I believe so. What is my statement of grievances to consist of? In a few words, of the following: music uninterruptedly, Guiche's assiduity, suspicions of treasonable plots and practices. And the proofs? There are none. Very well, I will go at once to see Madame. The king turned to look in the mirrors at his costume, which was very rich, and his face, which was radiant as the morning. I suppose my brother is kept a little at a distance, said the king. Fire and water cannot be more opposite. That will do. Permit me, madame, to kiss your hands, the most beautiful hands in France. May you be successful, sire, as the family peacemaker. I do not employ an ambassador, said Louis, which is as much to say that I shall succeed. He laughed as he left the room, and carelessly adjusted his ruffles as he went along. End of chapter 32. Recording by Emily Fuca. 33 of 10 Years Later. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Emily Fuca. 10 Years Later by Alexandre Dumas. Chapter 33. The Mediator. When the king made his appearance in Madame's apartments, the courtiers, whom the news of a conjugal misunderstanding had dispersed through the various apartments, began to entertain the most serious apprehensions. A storm was brewing in that direction, the elements of which the Chevalier de Lorraine, in the midst of the different groups, was analyzing with delight, contributing to the weaker, and acting, according to his own wicked designs, in such a manner with regard to the stronger, as to produce the most disastrous consequences possible. As Anne of Austria had herself said, the presence of the king gave a solemn and serious character to the event. Indeed, in the year 1662, the dissatisfaction of Monsieur with Madame, and the king's intervention in the private affairs of Monsieur, was a matter of no inconsiderable moment. The boldest even, who had been the associates of the Comte de Guiche, had, from the first moment, held aloof from him, with a sort of nervous apprehension; and the comte himself, infected by the general panic, retired to his own room. The king entered Madame's private apartments, acknowledging and returning the salutations, as he was always in the habit of doing. The ladies of honor were ranged in a line on his passage along the gallery. Although his majesty was very much preoccupied, he gave the glance of a master at the 2 rows of young and beautiful girls who modestly cast down their eyes, blushing as they felt the king's gaze fall upon them. Only one of the number, whose long hair fell in silken masses upon the most beautiful skin imaginable, was pale, and could hardly sustain herself, notwithstanding the knocks which her companion gave her with her elbow. It was La Valliere, whom Montalais supported in that manner by whispering some of that courage to her which she herself was so abundantly provided. The king could not resist turning round to look at them again. Their faces, which had already been raised, were again lowered, but the only fair head among them remained motionless, as if all the strength and intelligence she had left had abandoned her. When he entered Madame's room, Louis found his sister-in-law reclining upon the cushions of her cabinet. She then resumed her seat, overcome by a sudden weakness, which was no doubt assumed, for a delightful color animated her cheeks, and her eyes, still red from the tears she had recently shed, never had more fire in them. When the king was seated, as soon as he had remarked, with that accuracy of observation which characterized him, the disorder of the apartment, and the no less greater disorder of Madame's countenance, he assumed a playful manner, saying, "My dear sister, at what hour today would you wish the repetition of the ballet to take place?" Madame, shaking her charming head, slowly and languishingly said, "Ah, sire, you will graciously excuse my appearance at the repetition. I was about to send to inform you that I could not attend today." "Indeed," said the king, in apparent surprise; "are you not well?" "No, sire." "I will summon your medical attendants, then." "No, they can do nothing for my indisposition." "You alarm me." "Sire, I wish to ask your majesty's permission to return to England." The king started. "Return to England?" he said. "Do you really say what you mean?" "I say it reluctantly, sire," replied the granddaughter of Henry IV., firmly, her beautiful black eyes flashing. "I regret to have to confide such matters to your majesty, but I feel myself too unhappy at your majesty's court, and I wish to return to my own family." "Madame, madame!" exclaimed the king, as he approached her. "Listen to me, sire," continued the young woman, acquiring by degrees that ascendency over her interrogator which her beauty and her nervous nature conferred. "Young as I am, I have already suffered humiliation and have endured disdain here. Oh, do not contradict me, sire," she said with a smile. The king colored. "Then," she continued, "I had reasoned myself to the belief that Heaven called me into existence with that object, I, the daughter of a powerful monarch; that since my father had been deprived of life, Heaven could well smite my pride. I have suffered greatly; I have been the cause, too, of my mother's suffering much; but I vowed that if Providence ever placed me in a position of independence, even were it that of a workman of the lower classes, who gains her bread by her labor, I would never suffer humiliation again. That day has now arrived. I have been restored to the fortune due to my rank, and to my birth. I have even ascended again the steps of a throne, and I thought that, in allying myself with a French prince, I should find in him a relation, a friend, an equal. But I perceive I have found only a master, and I rebel. My mother shall know nothing of it. You, whom I respect, and whom I love." The king started. Never had any voice so gratified his ear. "You, sire, who know all, since you have come here, you will perhaps understand me. If you had not come, I should have gone to you. I wish for permission to go away. I leave it to your delicacy of feeling to exculpate and protect me." "My dear sister," murmured the king, overpowered by this bold attack, "have you reflected upon the enormous difficulty of the project you have conceived?" "Sire, I do not reflect, I feel. Attacked, I instinctively repel the attack, nothing more." "Come, tell me, what have they done to you?" said the king. The princess, it will have been seen, by this peculiarly feminine maneuver, had escaped every reproach, and advanced on her side a far more serious one. From the accused she became the accuser. It is an infallible sign of guilt; but notwithstanding that, all women, even the least clever of the sex, invariably know how to derive some such means of turning the tables. The king had forgotten that he was paying her a visit in order to say to her, "What have you done to my brother?" and he was reduced to weakly asking her, "What have they done to you?" "What have they done to me?" replied Madame. "One must be a woman to understand it, sire. They have made me shed tears." And with one of her fingers, whose slenderness and perfect whiteness were unequaled, she pointed to her brilliant eyes, swimming with unshed drops, and again began to weep. "I implore you, my dear sister," said the king, advancing to take her warm and throbbing hand, which she abandoned to him. "In the first place, sire, I was deprived of the presence of my brother's friend. The Duke of Buckingham was an agreeable, cheerful visitor, my own countryman, who knew my habits; I will say almost a companion, so accustomed had we been to pass our days together, with our other friends, upon the beautiful piece of water at St. James's. But Villiers was in love with you." "A pretext! What does it matter," she said seriously, "whether the duke was in love with me or not? Is a man in love so very dangerous for me? Ah! sire, it is not sufficient for a man to love a woman." And she smiled so tenderly, and with so much archness, that the king felt his heart swell and throb in his breast. "At all events, if my brother were jealous?" interrupted the king. "Very well, I admit that is a reason." "And the duke was sent away accordingly?" "No, not sent away." "Driven away, dismissed, expelled, then, if you prefer it, sire. One of the first gentlemen of Europe obliged to leave the court of the King of France, of Louis XIV., like a beggar, on account of a glance or a bouquet. It was little worthy of a most gallant court. But forgive me, sire, I forgot that, in speaking thus, I am attacking your sovereign power." "I assure you, my dear sister, it was not I who dismissed the Duke of Buckingham; I was charmed with him." "It was not you?" said Madame. "Ah, so much the better." And she emphasized the "so much the better," as if she had instead said, "so much the worse." A few minutes' silence ensued. She then resumed: "The Duke of Buckingham having left, I know now why and by whose means, I thought I should have recovered my tranquillity. But not at all, for all at once Monsieur found another pretext. All at once—" "All at once," said the king, playfully, "some one presents himself. It is but natural; you are beautiful, and will always meet with men who will madly love you." "In that case," exclaimed the princess, "I will create a solitude around me, which indeed seems to be what is wished, and what is being prepared for me. But no, I prefer to return to London. There I am known and appreciated. I shall have friends, without fearing they may be regarded as my lovers. Shame! It is a disgraceful suspicion, and unworthy of a gentleman. Monsieur has lost everything in my estimation, since he has shown me he can be a tyrant to a woman." "Nay, nay, my brother's only fault is that of loving you." "Love me! Monsieur love me! Ah, sire," and she burst out laughing, "Monsieur will never love any woman," she said. "Monsieur loves himself too much. No, unhappily for me, Monsieur's jealousy is of the worst kind; he is jealous without love." "Confess, however," said the king, who began to be excited by this varied and animated conversation, "confess that Guiche loves you." "Ah, sire, I know nothing about that." "You must have perceived it; a man who loves readily betrays himself." "M. de Guiche has not betrayed himself." "My dear sister, you are defending M. de Guiche." "I, indeed! Ah, sire, I only needed a suspicion from yourself to crown my wretchedness." "No, madame, no," returned the king, hurriedly; "do not distress yourself. Nay, you are weeping; I implore you to calm yourself." She wept, however, and large tears fell upon her hands. The king took one of her hands in his, and kissed the tears away. She looked at him so sadly and with so much tenderness, that he felt his heart giving way under her gaze. "You have no kind feeling, then, for Guiche?" he said, more disturbed than became his character of mediator. "None, absolutely none." "Then I can reassure my brother in that respect?" "Nothing will satisfy him, sire. Do not believe he is jealous. Monsieur has been badly advised by someone, and he is of a nervous disposition." "He may well be so when you are concerned," said the king. Madame cast down her eyes, and was silent. The king did so likewise, still holding her hand all the while. Their momentary silence seemed to last an age. Madame gently withdrew her hand, and from that moment she felt her triumph was certain, and that the field of battle was her own. "Monsieur complains," said the king, "that you prefer the society of private individuals to his own conversation and society." "But Monsieur passes his life in looking at his face in the glass, and in plotting all sorts of spiteful things against women with the Chevalier de Lorraine." "Oh, you are going somewhat too far." "I only tell you what is true. Do you observe for yourself, sire, and you will see that I am right." "I will observe; but, in the meantime, what satisfaction can I give my brother?" "My departure." "You repeat that word," exclaimed the king, imprudently, as if, during the last 10 minutes, such a change had been produced that Madame would have had all her ideas on the subject thoroughly changed. "Sire, I cannot be happy here any longer," she said. "M. de Guiche annoys Monsieur. Will he be sent away too?" "If it be necessary. "Why not?" replied the king, smiling. "Well, and after M. de Guiche, whom, by the by, I shall regret, I warn you, sire." "Ah, you will regret him?" "Certainly; he is amiable, he has a great friendship for me, and he amuses me." "If Monsieur were only to hear you," said the king, slightly annoyed. "Do you know I would not undertake to make it up again between you. Nay, I would not even attempt it." "Sire, can you, even now, prevent Monsieur from being jealous of the first person who may approach? I know very well that M. de Guiche is not the first." "Again, I warn you that as a good brother I shall take a dislike to De Guiche." "Ah, sire, do not, I entreat you, adopt either the sympathies or the dislikes of Monsieur. Remain king; better for yourself and for every one else." "You jest charmingly, madame, and I can well understand how the people you attack must adore you." "And is that the reason why you, sire, whom I had regarded as my defender, are about to join those who persecute me?" said Madame. "I your persecutor? Heaven forbid!" "Then," she continued languishingly, "grant me a favor." "Whatever you wish." "Let me return to England." "Never, never!" exclaimed Louis XIV. "I am a prisoner, then?" "In France, if France is a prison, yes." "What must I do, then?" "I will tell you. Instead of devoting yourself to friendships which are somewhat unstable, instead of alarming us by your retirement, remain always in our society; do not leave us; let us live as a united family. M. de Guiche is certainly very amiable, but if, at least, we do not possess his wit Ah, sire, you know very well you are pretending to be modest." "No, I swear to you. One may be a king, and yet feel that he possesses fewer chances of pleasing than many other gentlemen." "I am sure, sire, that you do not believe a single word you are saying." The king looked at Madame tenderly, and said, "Will you promise me one thing?" "What is it?" "That you will no longer waste upon strangers, in your own apartments, the time which you owe us. Shall we make an offensive and defensive alliance against the common enemy?" "An alliance with you, sire?" "Why not? Are you not a sovereign power?" "But are you, sire, a reliable ally?" "You shall see, madame." "And when shall this alliance commence?" "This very day." "I will draw up the treaty, and you shall sign it." "Blindly." "Then, sire, I promise you wonders. You are the star of the court, and when you make your appearance everything will be resplendent." "Oh, madame, madame," said Louis XIV., "you know well that there is no brilliancy that does not proceed from yourself, and that if I assume the sun as my device, it is only an emblem." "Sire, you flatter your ally, and you wish to deceive her," said Madame, threatening the king with her finger menacingly raised. "What! you believe I am deceiving you when I assure you of my affection?" "Yes." "What makes you so suspicious?" "One thing." "What is it? I shall indeed be unhappy if I do not overcome it." "The one thing in question, sire, is not in your power, not even in the power of Heaven." "Tell me what it is." "The past." "I do not understand, madame," said the king, precisely because he had understood her but too well. The princess took his hand in hers. "Sire," she said, "I have had the misfortune to displease you for so long a period, that I have almost the right to ask myself today why you were able to accept me as a sister in law." "Displease me? You have displeased me?" "Nay, do not deny it, for I remember it well." "Our alliance shall date from today," exclaimed the king, with a warmth that was not assumed. "You will not think any more of the past, will you? I myself am resolved that I will not. I shall always remember the present; I have it before my eyes. Look." And he led the princess before a mirror, in which she saw herself reflected, blushing and beautiful enough to overcome a saint. "It is all the same," she murmured; "it will not be a very worthy alliance." "Must I swear?" inquired the king, intoxicated by the voluptuous turn the whole conversation had taken. "Oh, I will not refuse to witness a resounding oath," said Madame; "it has always the semblance of security." The king knelt upon a footstool and took Madame's hand. She, with a smile that no painter could ever succeed in depicting, and which a poet might only imagine, gave him both her hands, in which he hid his burning face. Neither of them could utter a syllable. The king felt Madame withdraw her hands, caressing his face while she did so. He rose immediately and left the apartment. The courtier remarked his heightened color, and concluded that the scene had been a stormy one. The Chevalier de Lorraine, however, hastened to say, "Nay, be comforted, gentlemen, his majesty is always pale when he is angry." Chapter 34. Of 10 Years Later. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. 10 Years Later, by Alexandre Dumas. Chapter 34. The Advisors. The king left Madame in a state of agitation it would have been difficult even for himself to have explained. It is impossible, in fact, to depict the secret play of those strange sympathies which, suddenly and apparently without cause, are excited, after many years passed in the greatest calmness and indifference, by two hearts destined to love each other. Why had Louis formerly disdained, almost hated Madame? Why did he now find the same woman so beautiful, so captivating? And why not only were his thoughts occupied about her, but still more, why were they so continuously occupied about her? Why, in fact, had Madame, whose eyes and mind were sought for in another direction, shown during the last week towards the king a semblance of favor which encouraged the belief of still greater regard? It must not be supposed that Louis proposed himself to any plan of seduction. The tie which united Madame to his brother was, or at least seemed to him, an insuperable barrier. He was even too far removed from that barrier to perceive its existence. But on the downward path of those passions in which the heart rejoices, towards which youth impels us, no one can decide where to stop, not even the man who has in advance calculated all the chances of his own success or another's submission. As far as Madame was concerned, her regard for the king may easily be explained. She was young, a coquette, and ardently fond of admiration. Hers was one of those buoyant, impetuous natures, which upon a theatre would leap over the greatest obstacles to obtain an acknowledgment of applause from the spectators. It was not surprising, then, that after having been adored by Buckingham, by De Guiche, who was superior to Buckingham, even if it were only from that negative merit, so much appreciated by woman, that is to say, novelty, it was not surprising, we say, that the princess should raise her ambition to be admired by the king, who not only was the first person in the kingdom, but was also one of the handsomest and cleverest men in Europe. As for the sudden passion with which Louis was inspired for his sister-in-law, physiology would perhaps supply an explanation by some hackneyed commonplace reasons, and nature by means of her mysterious affinity of characters. Madame had the most beautiful black eyes in the world. Louis eyes as beautiful, but blue. Madame was laughter-loving and unreserved in her manners; Louis melancholy and diffident. Summoned to meet each other for the first time upon the grounds of interest and common curiosity, these two opposite natures were mutually influenced by the mingling of their reciprocal contradictions of character. Louis, when he returned to his own rooms, acknowledged to himself that Madame was the most attractive woman of his court. Madame, left alone, delightedly thought that she had made a great impression on the king. This feeling with her must remain passive, whilst the king could not but act with all the natural vehemence of the heated fancies of a young man, and of a young man who has but to express a wish to see his wish fulfilled. The first thing the king did was to announce to Monsieur that everything was quietly arranged, that Madame had the greatest respect, the sincerest affection for him, but that she was of a proud, impetuous character, and that her susceptibilities were so acute as to require very careful management. Monsieur replied in the reticent tone of voice he generally adopted with his brother, that he could not very well understand the susceptibilities of a woman whose conduct might, in his opinion, expose her to censorious remarks, and that if any one had a right to feel wounded, it was he, Monsieur himself. To this the king replied in a quick tone of voice, which showed the interest he took in his sister in law, "Thank Heaven, Madame is above censure." "The censure of others, certainly, I admit," said Monsieur, "but not above mine, I presume." "Well," said the king, "all I have to say, Philippe, is that Madame's conduct does not deserve your censure. She certainly is heedless and singular, but professes the best feelings. The English character is not always well understood in France, and the liberty of English manners sometimes surprises those who do not know the extent to which this liberty is enriched by innocence." "Ah!" said Monsieur, more and more piqued, "from the very moment that your majesty absolves my wife, whom I accuse, my wife is not guilty, and I have nothing more to say." "Philippe," replied the king hastily, for he felt the voice of conscience murmuring softly in his heart, that Monsieur was not altogether wrong, "what I have done and what I have said has been only for your happiness. I was told that you complained of a want of confidence and attention on Madame's part, and I did not wish your uneasiness to be prolonged. It is part of my duty to watch over your household, as over that of the humblest of my subjects. I have satisfied myself, therefore, with the sincerest pleasure, that your apprehensions have no foundation." "And," continued Monsieur, in an interrogative tone of voice, and fixing his eyes upon his brother, "what your majesty has discovered for Madame, and I bow myself to your superior judgment, have you verified for those who have been the cause of the scandal of which I complain?" "You are right, Philippe," said the king; "I will reserve that point for future consideration." These words comprised an order as well as a consolation. The prince felt it to be so, and withdrew. As for Louis, he went to seek his mother, for he felt that he had need of a more complete absolution than that he had just received from his brother. Anne of Austria did not entertain for M. de Guiche the same reasons for indulgence she had had for Buckingham. She perceived, at the very first words he pronounced, that Louis was not disposed to be severe. To appear in a contradictory humor was one of the stratagems of the good queen, in order to succeed in ascertaining the truth. But Louis was no longer in his apprenticeship; already for more than a year past he had been king, and during that year he had learned how to dissemble. Listening to Anne of Austria in order to permit her to disclose her own thoughts, testifying his approval only by a look and gesture, he became convinced, from certain piercing glances, and from certain skillful insinuations, that the queen, so clear sighted in matters of gallantry, had, if not guessed, at least suspected his weakness for Madame. Of all his auxiliaries, Anne of Austria would be the most important to secure. Of all his enemies, Anne of Austria would prove most dangerous. Louis, therefore, changed his maneuvers. He complained of Madame, absolved Monsieur, listened to what his mother had to say of De Guiche, as he had previously listened to what she had to say of Buckingham, and then, when he saw that she thought she had gained a complete victory over him, he left her. The whole court, that is to say, all the favorites and more intimate associates, and they were numerous, since there were already 5 masters, were assembled in the evening for the repetition of the ballet. This interval had been occupied by poor De Guiche in receiving visits; among the number was one which he hoped and feared nearly to an equal extent. It was that of the Chevalier de Lorraine. About 3 o'clock in the afternoon the chevalier entered De Guiche's rooms. His looks were of the most reassuring character. Monsieur, said he to De Guiche, was in an excellent humor, and no one could say that the slightest cloud had passed across the conjugal sky. Besides, Monsieur was not one to bear ill feeling. For a long time past, during his residence at the court, the Chevalier de Lorraine had decided that of Louis XIII.'s 2 sons, Monsieur was the one who had inherited the father's character. An uncertain, irresolute character, impulsively good, indifferently disposed at the bottom, but certainly a cipher for his friends. He especially cheered De Guiche by pointing out to him that Madame would, before long, succeed in governing her husband, and that, consequently, That man would govern Monsieur who should succeed in influencing Madame. To this, De Guiche, full of mistrust and presence of mind, replied, "Yes, chevalier, but I believe Madame to be a very dangerous person." "In what respect?" "She has perceived that Monsieur is not very passionately inclined towards women." "Quite true," said the Chevalier de Lorraine, laughing. "In that case, Madame will choose the first one who approaches, in order to make him the object of her preference, and to bring back her husband by jealousy." "Deep, deep!" exclaimed the chevalier. "But true," replied De Guiche. Neither the one nor the other expressed his real thought. De Guiche, at the very moment he thus attacked Madame's character, mentally asked her forgiveness from the bottom of his heart. The chevalier, while admiring De Guiche's penetration, was leading him, blindfolded, to the brink of the precipice. De Guiche then questioned him more directly upon the effect produced by the scene of the morning, and upon the still more serious effect produced by the scene at dinner. "But I have already told you they are all laughing at it," replied the Chevalier de Lorraine, "and Monsieur himself at the head of them." "Yet," hazarded De Guiche, "I have heard that the king paid Madame a visit." "Yes, precisely so. Madame was the only one who did not laugh, and the king went to her in order to make her laugh too. So that nothing is altered in the arrangements of the day," said the chevalier. "And is there a repetition of the ballet this evening?" "Certainly." "Are you sure?" "Quite," returned the chevalier. At this moment of the conversation between the two young men, Raoul entered, looking full of anxiety. As soon as the chevalier, who had a secret dislike for him, as for every other noble character, perceived him enter, he rose from his seat. "What do you advise me to do, then?" inquired De Guiche of the chevalier. "I advise you to go to sleep in perfect tranquillity, my dear count." "And my advice, De Guiche," said Raoul, "is the very opposite." "What is that?" "To mount your horse and set off at once for one of your estates. On your arrival, follow the chevalier's advice if you like; and what is more, you can sleep there as long and as tranquilly as you please." "What! set off?" exclaimed the chevalier, feigning surprise. "Why should De Guiche set off?" "Because, and you cannot be ignorant of it, you particularly so, because every one is talking about the scene which has passed between Monsieur and De Guiche." De Guiche turned pale. "Not at all," replied the chevalier, "not at all; and you have been wrongly informed, Monsieur de Bragelonne." "I have been perfectly well informed, on the contrary, monsieur," replied Raoul; "and the advice I give De Guiche is that of a friend." During this discussion, De Guiche, somewhat shaken, looked alternately first at one and then at the other of his advisors. He inwardly felt that a game, important in all its consequences for the rest of his life, was being played at that moment. "Is it not fact," said the chevalier, putting the question to the count himself, "is it not fact, De Guiche, that the scene was not so tempestuous as the Vicomte de Bragelonne seems to think, and who, moreover, was not himself there?" "Whether tempestuous or not," persisted Raoul, "it is not precisely of the scene itself that I am speaking, but of the consequences that may ensue. I know that Monsieur has threatened, I know that Madame has been in tears." "Madame in tears!" exclaimed De Guiche, imprudently clasping his hands. "Ah!" said the chevalier, laughing, "this is indeed a circumstance I was not acquainted with. You are decidedly better informed than I am, Monsieur de Bragelonne; and it is because I am better informed than yourself, chevalier, that I insist upon De Guiche leaving." "No, no, I regret to differ from you, vicomte, but his departure is unnecessary. Why, indeed, should he leave? Tell us why." "The king." "The king!" exclaimed De Guiche. "Yes, I tell you the king has taken up the affair." "Bah!" said the chevalier, "the king likes De Guiche, and particularly his father. Reflect that, if the count were to leave, it would be an admission that he had done something which merited rebuke." "Why so?" "No doubt of it; when one runs away, it is either from guilt or fear." "Sometimes because a man is offended, often because he is wrongfully accused," said Bragelonne. We will assign as a reason for his departure that he feels hurt and injured. Nothing will be easier. We will say that we both did our utmost to keep him, and you, at least, will not be speaking otherwise than the truth. Come, De Guiche, you are innocent, and, being so, the scene of today must have wounded you, so set off." "No, De Guiche, remain where you are," said the chevalier, "precisely as M. de Bragelonne has put it, because you are innocent. Once more, forgive me, vicomte, but my opinion is the very opposite to your own." "And you are at perfect liberty to maintain it, monsieur; but be assured that the exile which De Guiche will voluntarily impose upon himself will be of short duration. He can terminate it whenever he pleases, and returning from his voluntary exile, he will meet with smiles from all lips; while, on the contrary, the anger of the king may now draw down a storm upon his head, the end of which no one can foresee." The chevalier smiled, and muttered to himself, "That is the very thing I wish." And at the same time he shrugged his shoulders, a movement which did not escape the count, who dreaded, if he quitted the court, to seem to yield to a feeling of fear. "No, no, I have decided, Bragelonne, I stay." "I prophesy, then," said Raoul, sadly, "that misfortune will befall you, De Guiche." "I, too, am a prophet, but not a prophet of evil. On the contrary, count, I say to you, remain." "Are you sure," inquired De Guiche, "that the repetition of the ballet still takes place?" "Quite sure." "Well, you see, Raoul," continued De Guiche, endeavoring to smile, "you see the court is not so very sorrowful, or so readily disposed for internal dissensions, when dancing is carried on with such assiduity. Come, acknowledge that," said the count to Raoul, who shook his head, saying, "I have nothing to add." "But," inquired the chevalier, curious to learn whence Raoul had obtained his information, the exactitude of which he was inwardly forced to admit, "since you say you are well informed, vicomte, how can you be better informed than myself, who am one of the prince's most intimate companions?" "To such a declaration I submit. You certainly ought to be perfectly well informed, I admit, and, as a man of honor is incapable of saying anything but what he knows to be true, or of speaking otherwise than what he thinks, I will say no more, but confess myself defeated, and leave you in possession of the field of battle." Whereupon Raoul, who now seemed only to care to be left quiet, threw himself upon a couch, whilst the count summoned his servants to aid him in dressing. The chevalier, finding that time was passing away, wished to leave, but he feared, too, that Raoul, left alone with De Guiche, might yet influence him to change his mind. He therefore made use of his last resource. "Madame," he said, "will be brilliant; she appears today in her costume of Pomona." "Yes, that is so," exclaimed the count. "And she has just given directions in consequence," continued the chevalier. "You know, Monsieur de Bragelonne, that the king is to appear as spring." "It will be admirable," said De Guiche, "and that is a better reason for me to remain than any you have yet given, because I am to appear as autumn, and shall have to dance with Madame. I cannot absent myself without the king's orders, since my departure would interrupt the ballet." "I," said the chevalier, "am to be only a simple égyptian. True it is I am a bad dancer, and my legs are not well made. Gentlemen, adieu. Do not forget the basket of fruit which you are to offer to Pomona, count." "Rest assured," said De Guiche, delightedly, "I shall forget nothing." "I am now quite certain that he will remain," murmured the Chevalier de Lorraine to himself. Raoul, when the chevalier had left, did not even attempt to dissuade his friend, for he felt that it would be trouble thrown away; he merely observed to the comte, in his melancholy and melodious voice, "You are embarking in a most dangerous enterprise. I know you well; you go to extremes in everything, and the lady you love does so too. Admitting for an instant that she should at last love you." "Oh, never!" exclaimed De Guiche. "Why do you say never?" "Because it would be a great misfortune for both of us." "In that case, instead of regarding you simply imprudent, I cannot but consider you absolutely mad." "Why?" "Are you perfectly sure, mind, answer me frankly, that you do not wish her whom you love to make any sacrifice for you?" "Yes, yes, quite sure." "Love her, then, at a distance." "What, at a distance?" Certainly. What matters being present or absent, since you expect nothing from her? Love her portrait, a memento. Raoul! Love is a shadow, an illusion, a chimera. Be devoted to the affection itself, in giving a name to your ideality. Ah! You turn away, your servants approach. I will say no more. In good or bad fortune, De Guiche, depend on me. Indeed, I shall do so. Very well, that is all I had to say to you. Spare no pains in your person, De Guiche, and look your very best. Adieu. You will not be present then at the ballet, Vicomte? No, I shall have a visit to pay in town. Farewell, De Guiche. The reception was to take place in the king's apartments. In the first place there were the queens, then Madame, and a few ladies of the court who had been carefully selected. A great number of courtiers, also selected, occupied the time, before the dancing commenced, in conversing, as people knew how to converse in those times. None of the ladies who had received invitations appeared in the costumes of the fete, as the Chevalier de Lorraine had predicted, but many conversations took place about the rich and ingenious toilettes designed by different painters for the ballet of the demigods, for thus were termed the kings and queens of which Fontainebleau was about to become the Pantheon. Monsieur arrived, holding in his hand a drawing representing his character. He looked somewhat anxious. He bowed courteously to the young queen and his mother, but saluted Madame almost cavalierly. His notice of her and his coldness of manner were observed by all. M. de Guiche indemnified the princess by a look of passionate devotion, and it must be admitted that Madame, as she raised her eyes, returned it to him with interest. It is unquestionable that De Guiche had never looked so handsome, for Madame's glance had its customary effect of lighting up the features of the son of the Marshal de Gramont. The king's sister-in-law felt a storm mustering above her head. She felt, too, that during the whole of the day, so fruitful in future events, she had acted unjustly, if not treasonably, toward one who loved her with such a depth of devotion. In her eyes the moment seemed to have arrived for an acknowledgment to the poor victim of the injustice of the morning. Her heart spoke and murmured the name of De Guiche. The count was sincerely pitied, and accordingly gained the victory over all others. Neither Monsieur, nor the king, nor the Duke of Buckingham was any longer thought of. De Guiche, at the moment, reigned without a rival. But although Monsieur also looked very handsome, still he could not be compared to the count. It is well known, indeed all women say so, that a wide difference invariably exists between the good looks of a lover and those of a husband. Besides, in the present case, after Monsieur had left, and after the courteous and affectionate recognition of the young queen and of the queen mother, and the careless and indifferent notice of Madame, which all the courtiers had remarked, all these motives gave the lover the advantage over the husband. Monsieur was too great a personage to notice these details. Nothing is so certain as a well settled idea of superiority to prove the inferiority of the man who has that opinion of himself. The king arrived. Everyone looked for what might possibly happen in the glance, which began to bestir the world, like the brow of Jupiter Tonans. Louis had none of his brother's gloominess, but was perfectly radiant. Having examined the greater part of the drawings which were displayed for his inspection on every side, he gave his opinion or made his remarks upon them, and in this manner rendered some happy and others wretched by a single word. Suddenly his glance, which was smilingly directed toward Madame, detected the slight correspondence established between the princess and the count. He bit his lips, but when he opened them again to utter a few commonplace remarks, he said, advancing toward the queens, "I have just been informed that everything is now prepared at Fontainebleau, in accordance with my directions." A murmur of satisfaction arose from the different groups, and the king perceived on every face the greatest anxiety to receive an invitation for the fete. "I shall leave to morrow," he added; whereupon the profoundest silence immediately ensued. "And I invite," said the king, finishing, "all those who are now present to get ready to accompany me." Smiling faces were now everywhere visible, with the exception of Monsieur, who seemed to retain his ill humor. The different noblemen and ladies of the court thereupon defiled before the king, one after the other, in order to thank his majesty for the great honor which had been conferred upon them by the invitation. When it came to De Guiche's turn, the king said, "Ah, Monsieur de Guiche, I did not see you." The comte bowed, and Madame turned pale. De Guiche was about to open his lips to express his thanks, when the king said, "Comte, this is the season for farming purposes in the country. I am sure your tenants in Normandy will be glad to see you." The king, after this pitiless attack, turned his back on the poor comte, whose turn it was now to become pale. He advanced a few steps towards the king, forgetting that the king is never spoken to except in reply to the questions addressed. "I have, perhaps, misunderstood your majesty," he stammered out. The king turned his head slightly, and with a cold and stern glance, which plunged like a sword relentlessly into the hearts of those under disgrace, repeated, "I said retire to your estates," allowing every syllable to fall slowly one by one. A cold perspiration bedewed the comte's face, his hands convulsively opened, and his hat, which he held between his trembling fingers, fell to the ground. Louis sought his mother's glance, as though to show her that he was the master. He sought his brother's triumphant look, as if to ask him if he were satisfied with the vengeance taken; and lastly his eyes fell upon Madame, but the princess was laughing and smiling with Madame de Noailles. She heard nothing, or rather had pretended not to hear at all. The Chevalier de Lorraine looked on also, with one of those looks of fixed hostility that seem to give to a man's glance the power of a lever, when it raises an obstacle, wrests it away, and casts it to a distance. M. de Guiche was left alone in the king's cabinet, the whole of the company having departed. Shadows seemed to dance before his eyes. He suddenly broke through the settled despair that overwhelmed him, and flew to hide himself in his own room, where Raoul awaited him, immovable in his own sad presentiments. "Well," he murmured, seeing his friend enter, bareheaded, with a wild gaze and tottering gait. "Yes, yes, it is true," said De Guiche, unable to utter more, and falling exhausted upon the couch. "And she?" inquired Raoul. "She!" exclaimed his unhappy friend, as he raised his hand clenched in anger towards heaven. "She!" "What did she say and do?" "She said that her dress suited her admirably, and then she laughed." A fit of hysteric laughter seemed to shatter his nerves, for he fell backwards, completely overcome. Chapter 34. Recording by Emily Fuca.
5 of 10 years later. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. 10 years later, by Alexandre Dumas. Chapter 35. Fontainebleau. For 4 days, every kind of enchantment brought together in the magnificent gardens of Fontainebleau had converted this spot into a place of the most perfect enjoyment. M. Colbert seemed gifted with ubiquity. In the morning, there were the accounts of the previous night's expenses to settle; during the day, programmes, essays, enrolments, payments. M. Colbert had amassed 4 millions of francs, and dispersed them with sleepless economy. He was horrified at the expenses which mythology involved. Not a wood nymph nor a dryad that cost less than 100 francs a day. The dress alone amounted to 300 francs. The expense of powder and sulphur for fireworks amounted, every night, to 100,000 francs. In addition to these, the illuminations on the borders of the sheet of water cost 30,000 francs every evening. The fetes had been magnificent, and Colbert could not restrain his delight. From time to time he noticed Madame and the king setting forth on hunting expeditions, or preparing for the reception of different fantastic personages solemn ceremonials which had been extemporized a fortnight before, and in which Madame's sparkling wit and the king's magnificence were equally well displayed. For Madame, the heroine of the fete, replied to the addresses of the deputations from unknown races, Garamanths, Scythians, Hyperboreans, Caucasians, and Patagonians, who seemed to issue from the ground for the purpose of approaching her with their congratulations, and upon every representative of these races the king bestowed a diamond, or some other article of value. Then the deputies, in verses more or less amusing, compared the king to the sun, Madame to Phoebe, the sun's sister, and the queen and Monsieur were no more spoken of than if the king had married Henrietta of England and not Maria Theresa of Austria. The happy pair, hand in hand, imperceptibly pressing each other's fingers, drank in deep draughts the sweet beverage of adulation, by which the attractions of youth, beauty, power, and love are enhanced. Every one at Fontainebleau was amazed at the extent of the influence which Madame had so rapidly acquired over the king, and whispered among themselves that Madame was, in point of fact, the true queen. And in effect, the king himself proclaimed its truth by his every thought, word, and look. He formed his wishes, he drew his inspirations from Madame's eyes, and his delight was unbounded when Madame deigned to smile upon him. And was Madame, on her side, intoxicated with the power she wielded, as she beheld every one at her feet? This was a question she herself could hardly answer, but what she did know was, that she could frame no wish, and that she felt herself to be perfectly happy. The result of all these changes, the source of which emanated from the royal will, was that Monsieur, instead of being the second person in the kingdom, had, in reality, become the third. And it was now far worse than in the time when De Guiche's guitars were heard in Madame's apartments, for then, at least, Monsieur had the satisfaction of frightening those who had annoyed him. Since the departure, however, of the enemy, who had been driven away by means of his alliance with the king, Monsieur had to submit to a burden, heavier, but in a very different sense, to his former one. Every evening Madame returned home quite exhausted. Horse riding, bathing in the Seine, spectacles, dinners under the leafy covert of the trees, balls on the banks of the Grand Canal, concerts, etc., etc. All this would have been sufficient to have killed, not a slight and delicate woman, but the strongest porter in the chateau. It is perfectly true that, with regard to dancing, concerts, and promenades, and such matters, a woman is far stronger than the most robust of porters. But, however great a woman's strength may be, there is a limit to it. She cannot hold out long under such a system. As for Monsieur, he had not even the satisfaction of witnessing Madame's abdication of her royalty in the evening, for she lived in the royal pavilion with the young queen and the queen mother. As a matter of course, the Chevalier de Lorraine did not quit Monsieur, and did not fail to distil drops of gall into every wound the latter received. The result was, that Monsieur, who had first been in the highest spirits, and completely restored since Guiche's departure, subsided into his melancholy state 3 days after the court was installed at Fontainebleau. It happened, however, that one day, about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, Monsieur, who had risen late, and had bestowed upon his toilet more than his usual attention, it happened, we repeat, that Monsieur, who had not heard of any plans having been arranged for the day, formed the project of collecting his own court, and of carrying Madame off with him to Moret, where he possessed a charming country house. He accordingly went to the queen's pavilion, and was astonished, on entering, to find none of the royal servants in attendance. Quite alone, therefore, he entered the rooms, a door on the left opening to Madame's apartment, the one on the right to the young queen's. In his wife's apartment, Monsieur was informed by a sempstress who was working there, that every one had left at 11 o'clock, for the purpose of bathing in the Seine, that a grand fete was to be made of the expedition, and that all the carriages had been placed at the park gates, and that they had all set out more than an hour ago. "Very good," said Monsieur. "The idea is a good one. The heat is very oppressive, and I have no objection to bathe too." He summoned his servants, but no one came. He summoned those in attendance on Madame, but every one had gone out. He went to the stables, where he was informed by a groom that there were no more carriages of any description. He desired that a couple of horses should be saddled, one for himself and the other for his valet. The groom told him that all the horses had been sent away. Monsieur, pale with anger, again descended towards the queen's apartments, and penetrated as far as Anne of Austria's oratory, where he perceived, through the half-open tapestry hangings, his young and beautiful sister on her knees before the queen mother, who appeared weeping bitterly. He had not been either seen or heard. He cautiously approached the opening, and listened, the sight of so much grief having aroused his curiosity. Not only was the young queen weeping, but she was complaining also. "Yes," she said, "the king neglects me. The king devotes himself to pleasures and amusements only, in which I have no share." "Patience, patience, my daughter," said Anne of Austria, in Spanish, and then, also in Spanish, added some words of advice, which Monsieur did not understand. The queen replied by accusations, mingled with sighs and sobs, among which Monsieur often distinguished the word banos, which Maria Theresa accented with spiteful anger. "The baths," said Monsieur to himself. "It seems it is the baths that have put her out." And he endeavored to put together the disconnected phrases which he had been able to understand. It was easy to guess that the queen was complaining bitterly, and that, if Anne of Austria did not console her, she at least endeavored to do so. Monsieur was afraid to be detected listening at the door, and he therefore made up his mind to cough. The two queens turned round at the sound, and Monsieur entered. At sight of the prince, the young queen rose precipitately, and dried her tears. Monsieur, however, knew the people he had to deal with too well, and was naturally too polite to remain silent, and he accordingly saluted them. The queen mother smiled pleasantly at him, saying, "What do you want, Philip?" "I? Nothing," stammered Monsieur. "I was looking for—" "Whom?" "I was looking for Madame." "Madame is at the baths." "And the king?" said Monsieur, in a tone which made the queen tremble. "The king also, the whole court as well," replied Anne of Austria. "Except you, madame," said Monsieur. "Oh, I?" said the young queen. "I seem to terrify all those who amuse themselves." "And so do I, judging from appearances," rejoined Monsieur. Anne of Austria made a sign to her daughter-in-law, who withdrew, weeping. Monsieur's brows contracted, as he remarked aloud, "What a cheerless house! What do you think of it, mother?" "Why, no, every one here is pleasure hunting." "Yes, indeed, that is the very thing which makes those dull who do not care for pleasure." "In what a tone you say that, Philip!" "Upon my word, madame, I speak as I think." "Explain yourself. What is the matter?" "Ask my sister-in-law, rather, who, just now, was detailing all her grievances to you." "Her grievances! What?" "Yes, I was listening, accidentally I confess, but still I listened, so that I heard only too well my sister complain of those famous baths of Madame. Ah, folly! No, 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 people are not always foolish when they weep. The queen said banos, which means baths." "I repeat, Philip," said Anne of Austria, "that your sister is childishly jealous." "In that case, madame," replied the prince, "I, too, must with great humility accuse myself of possessing the same defect." "You also, Philip?" "Certainly." "Are you really jealous of these baths?" "And why not, madame? When the king goes to the baths with my wife, and does not take the queen?" "Why not? When Madame goes to the baths with the king, and does not do me the honor to even invite me?" "And you enjoin my sister-in-law to be satisfied, and require me to be satisfied too?" "You are raving, my dear Philip," said Anne of Austria. "You have driven the Duke of Buckingham away; you have been the cause of M. de Guiche's exile. Do you now wish to send the king away from Fontainebleau?" "I do not pretend to anything of the kind, madame," said Monsieur, bitterly; "but at least I can withdraw, and I shall do so." "Jealous of the king? Jealous of your brother?" "Yes, madame, I am jealous of the king, of my own brother, and remarkably jealous too." "Really, monsieur," exclaimed Anne of Austria, affecting to be indignant, "I begin to believe you are mad, and a sworn enemy to my repose. I therefore abandon the place to you, for I have no means of defending myself against such monomanias." She arose, and left Monsieur a prey to the most extravagant transport of passion. He remained for a moment, completely bewildered, then, recovering himself, again went to the stables, found the groom, once more asked him for a carriage or a horse, and upon his reply that there was neither the one or the other, Monsieur snatched a long whip from the hands of a stable boy, and began to pursue the poor devil of a groom all round the servants' courtyard, whipping him the while, in spite of his cries and excuses. Then, quite out of breath, covered with perspiration, and trembling in every limb, he returned to his own apartments, broke in pieces some beautiful specimens of porcelain, and then got into bed, booted and spurred as he was, crying out for some one to come to him. Chapter 35. Recording by Todd.